Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio. I'm your host, Big Rick, and you've arrived at the podcast that answers the question, is this rock and roll book or documentary worth your time and money? And today, the spotlight falls on DLR Book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World, which I'll review, I will rate, and then I'll give you all the information you need to determine if this book is for you. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. Who is David Lee Roth? Are we finally going to get that answer? It's one of the reasons why I was interested in this book. I mean, come on, can someone please crack the code on this guy? To me, Roth has always appeared as a caricature of himself. He dials up this persona and stays very consistent with this Diamond Dave character that he's created. But is that really who he is? Or is it all an act? How about some details on who this extremely unique, and that might be one of the greatest understatements of all time, this extraordinary unique, not only rock star, but human being is? And let's just see if this book title lives up to the hype. I want to know how David Lee Roth changed the world. Most of us know Roth, of course, as one of the greatest frontmen of all time. That can't even be disputed. In one of the greatest rock bands of all time, that can't be disputed, Van Halen. Roth left Van Halen at its peak in 1984. He did a couple of pretty good solo albums, pretty popular solo albums. He had that great band. It was Steve Vai on guitar, Billy Sheehan on bass, Greg Bissonette on drums. And then he came back years later with the Van Halen reunion, which kind of brought some closure there. But what else do we remember or really know about David Lee Roth? There really is not a lot out there about who this guy is. Here's what DLR Book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World, and that is actually the name of this book. It's a little unusual. It's not a DLR book. The title is DLR Book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World. Okay, just wanted to clear that one up. So what has writer Darren Paltrowitz found out about Roth? And how is he going to show us how he changed the world? That's what I was looking at when I first cracked this book open. First of all, Paltrowitz digs high and low to find anything on Roth's elusive life. I will definitely give him that. And when I say dig, I mean he's talking to accountants, he's talking to office staff, bar owners. Roth had over 20 touring guitarists in his solo bands, and Paltrowitz got to as many as he could. Anyone with a modicum of touch to Roth, he did his best to glean something, anything about Diamond Dave. Paltrowitz, I wanted to let you know, is a licensed PI, so you get kind of an investigative slant to some of the pages. So what did he come up with? Well, most of this is in the form of interviews. There are over 100 interviews telling the story of David Lee Roth. The majority of the book is made up of documenting Roth's solo career. There is some Van Halen stuff in here, but mainly it's about the multiple spinning projects Roth bounced back and forth from. And after all these interviews, you get an idea, a sense of what it was like to work with Roth. The book makes it clear he is extremely detailed and very involved with all aspects of what he's putting out. That's for sure. You also get a real clear picture of Roth's endless curiosity to learn and grow, and it's impressive. His drive seems almost unmatched, and a large part, as pointed out in the book, sometimes can be to his detriment. It made me think, I can now think of why he left Van Halen. Maybe it wasn't all ego and the need to be a bigger star and make movies. Remember, at that time, he left Van Halen. He was, MTV was popping. He was all over MTV. He was making these wild, uber popular videos for that first solo album, Crazy from the Heat. But without coming right out and saying it, I can see how Roth just didn't want to break or stop. Something that the Van Halen brothers wanted after years of, that grueling make an album tour spin cycle. So he just kept following his muse. And he seems to have been doing that pretty much all his life. Roth has been on TV and radio, podcasts. He's a pilot, a film director, an author. He's got a bunch of different product lines out there. He's also a licensed EMT. He ran a marathon. He speaks 4 languages, trains dogs professionally, does martial arts, paints. This book covers all that. And he most recently toured with the current incarnation of his band. The book follows closely how Roth did not stop creating since he left Van Halen the first time. Did he ever reach the heights of Van Halen with any of these side projects? Not really. But thanks to the book, I gained a ton of respect for David Lee Roth. And I don't know if that was Paltrowitz's aim with this book. I think anyone who reads this will get that the author is a big Roth fan. He doesn't hide it. There's no doubt about that. But by putting together all these interviews, you can't help but marvel at David Lee Roth and whoever that may be. How did he change the world? I think that is more of a personal question aimed at the author. You can see how his passion for Roth might have changed his world. The book is 230 pages. It has 6 pages of pictures that are mainly of the last few years of Roth playing live. A couple of Van Halen shots, again, primarily at the last couple of shows they did. It also includes a kind of a puzzling foreword. The foreword is by former wrestler Diamond Dallas Page, who he references that, the similarity of Diamond Dave connection. And I'm not sure where they were going with this. He tells a brief story about meeting Roth at a club. Really nothing in that meeting that pushes the Roth story to an interesting place. The foreword is more kind of a rundown of Page's resume and all his accomplishments. I really didn't get the foreword. After that, the book kicks in with a phone call that the author had with Roth. And it's the only time he interviews him. You don't really get much from it on the surface. But from reading Roth's answers, and I guess I took this in instead of like hearing them or seeing him talk on video because he's so animated and he's such this thing when you see him live, I felt like I saw something for the first time about Roth. And I feel if you look closely, you might see something that most miss. It's typical Roth. He's laughing. He's putting together a bunch of crazy sentences to answer a few questions. But underneath that persona, I caught a glimpse of a very smart guy, a really smart, educated, one-of-a-kind talent. I still really don't know if I know who David Lee Roth is, even after reading this book. What I do know is that Paltrowitz put together a ton of clues that have led me to gain a new respect for him. And I don't think we will ever really know who is behind that Diamond Dave persona. The DLR book, though, has brought us about as close to that as we might ever get. Coming up next, I'm going to take it even further and look at if this book is worth your time and money. And then the final step in the review, stamping the official Rock Talk Studio rating on DLR Book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World. Before we move on with the review, I've got a quick update about the podcast for you. And that is about the release schedule. So the release schedule has changed a little bit, and the way that I'm formatting the show has changed a little bit. So here's how it's going to look going forward. Every Tuesday, there's going to be a new episode. And the last Tuesday of the month is going to be the book buzz and the doc news. Sometimes there is a lot. Sometimes there's not enough to fill a segment. I just want to do it justice because I know a lot of you don't want to look around for all your news and you want to just go to one place to get it. And I have no problem putting it together. I love hearing about all the new stuff. I get notifications all the time. So at the end of the month, I'm just going to do one show, the book buzz and documentary news. It just gives me a little more time to come up with more reviews each month. So last Tuesday of every month, all the book buzz and doc news you don't want to miss. Time to take this book review one step further. I want to make sure I cover all the bases to see if you should be spending your time and money on this one. And that usually comes down to what type of fan you are on this subject. Now, is this book for you? Let's dig in and break down what type of fan is really going to enjoy this book. Let's start with looking at this book as if you're a casual fan of David Lee Roth. You will get a ton of insight here about how he spent his time after the '84 Van Halen breakup. It really leans into his solo projects. So anyone coming to this looking for Van Halen insight, there is a little, but not enough to hold a casual fan's attention for very long. The book just doesn't break any new ground on who he is as a person. At times, it is fascinating, no doubt. This is a fascinating guy, but you only get some of the picture of who Roth is. And for a casual fan, I don't know if that's enough to keep you interested in the depth of this dive. And here's really where the line is drawn. Roth's solo work. You really, really, really need to be into Roth's solo work to get fired up about this book, because Paltrowitz spends the majority of the book deep in the weeds, talking to those surrounding Roth, literally almost anyone who ever brushed up against him in any way. And he probes for what it's like to work with him on these solo albums, what kind of band leader he is, how he operates, how detailed he is. Roth is very detailed. And the book is almost charting him day to day. A lot of this is interesting, and it's no doubt fascinating, I think, for a Roth fan on how Paltrowitz goes and explores Roth's accomplishments on so many different things. This is not a love letter to David Lee Roth, but it's pretty close. The book looks everywhere to tell the story of what David Lee Roth has been up to since leaving Van Halen. Roth fans, this book fills in a lot of what Roth's career is all about, and I would say this book is definitely for you. Only one thing left to do with the DLR book, and that's see where it lines up with other titles out there. Time to give it the official Rock Talk Studio rating. Before the rating, I want to give you a really quick update on my quest for 25 5-star ratings on the Apple Podcast directory. For those of you who have been listening to the show, you know for the last couple of weeks here, I've been asking everybody to just please go on Apple Podcasts and leave me a 5-star review. It only takes a few minutes. You don't have to write a 3-4 paragraph description, just a couple sentences. It really helps me out when people are looking for a new show and they stumble on a show that has a lot of great ratings. It also helps me rank a little bit higher in the podcast world. 64% of my listeners listen to Apple Podcasts. If just a couple of you will go on there and just push this thing to 25, I would really appreciate it. Currently at 17, so I do want to thank the people who have left a rating. We started at 12, so we're getting there, and I know we can do it. 25 5-star ratings. Let's see what we can do, and I'll update you on this next week. Also, before I want to jump ahead, you know I'm always going to give you a recommendation for a new rock and roll podcast, and I'm going to give you a great recommendation today, and that's My Weekly Mixtape. This is a great show for those who loved the old mixtape. Who didn't love the old mixtape back in the day when you're making a mixtape for someone, how special it was, how personal it was? Let's listen to the trailer from the show, My Weekly Mixtape.
What does the word mixtape mean to you?
It was an art form.
Trying to woo them with my fantastic and eclectic taste in music.
If somebody gave you a mixtape, you felt like you really meant something to that person.
Mixtape to me is love.
My Weekly Mixtape is a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Tune in to hear themed playlist curations.
No one in the history of anyone should ever put Pantera after Derek and the Dominoes, but here we are.
This is going to be the weirdest playlist ever created, and I love it.
One-on-one sit-downs with the artists that made our mixtape special in the first place.
It's Bill Gibson with Huey Lewis and the News.
I'm Art from the band Everclear.
This is Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
This is Frank Turner, and good Lord, you've made the right choice today.
And so much more. My Weekly Mixtape is a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Listen now at myweeklymixtape.com or by searching My Weekly Mixtape wherever you listen to podcasts.
And that's Brian from My Weekly Mixtape, a great rock and roll podcast I highly suggest you go and check out. All right, let's wrap this review up with a rating of DLR Book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World. Rock Talk Studio rating time. Let's go ahead and rate the DLR book. Here's how I rate rock and roll books. It's 1 through 4. A 1 is the front row center. This is a one-of-a-kind, a unique book, something that really sets itself apart from others. It's an instant classic. That's a front row center. 2 is a floor seat. Highly recommended with a ton of reasons why I would say it's don't miss. That's 2 floor seat. 3 is a load seat. This is good. There are things that I enjoyed about it. There are things that are worth checking out. And then there are things that I found a little bit lacking, but a recommendation might lie in the type of fan you are about the artist being covered. And 4, you're in the nosebleeds, baby. DLR Book, How David Lee Roth Changed the World, is a load seat. It's a 3. It's a good read. I don't think you can find out more about the world of David Lee Roth. There are a few people he couldn't get to in this book, and I would have liked to seen a few of the bigger rock stars who cross paths with Roth comment on him. Kind of give it a little more broad view of Roth, but overall this book checks off the boxes of David Lee Roth's career, exploring every twisted road, some dead ends that leave you with an overview of how David Lee Roth changed the world, or at least at some points tried to. Next week, it's a book review celebrating 40 years of an iconic record and soundtrack to a movie. This was huge in 1984, and it's still huge today. Any guesses? Here's a one-word clue. Purple. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and getting a chance to recommend a few titles for you. I hope you found a few things that you might be interested in checking out. Just because the episode is over does not mean the conversation is. You can join me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube for more book and doc talk. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.